We have a complicated relationship with carbohydrates. Half the internet tells you carbs are the enemy, that bread is poison, that grains are making you sick, that ketosis is the only path to health. The other half tells you to increase grains, to increase fiber, become a vegan, or lose the fat. I've seen the trend be reversed many times in my career. After 30 years of clinical practice, here is what I know. The problem has never been carbs. The problem has always been too much refined carbs. And most people, including many who have given up all grains, are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But I have news for you. Your brain and muscle, including your heart, depend on carbohydrate for optimal functioning. The brain is glucodependent. Sure, it can survive on ketones for a while because ketones are the mechanism intended by nature as a last resort when carbs are scarce. But it performs optimally on glucose. You need a minimal amount of carbs in your muscle. If you have none at all, this store will eventually deplete itself. Moral of the story: you can go keto for a while, but not without consequences. And believe me, not indefinitely. Conversely, you cannot live a healthy life if you overdo them. So this episode is about balance. Hello everyone, welcome to the Real Food Revolution. With my 30 years of practice, I share my view on the good, the bad, the ugly, to help you make sense of it all and start feeding yourself with joy and confidence again. Today, we are separating science from noise on 3 questions. What is the real difference between good and bad carbs? Who should genuinely worry about gluten? And what does the research actually say about low carbohydrate diets for longevity and for cancer prevention? So let's get into it. Let me start with a distinction that cuts through most of the confusion. Bad carbs are highly refined and stripped of everything that made them worth eating in the first place. White bread, white rice, sugary cereals, packaged snacks, soft drinks, pastries. That is where damage accumulates. Good carbs still look like real food. Quinoa, oats, buckwheat, beans, lentils, sweet potatoes, fruits, vegetables. They come with fiber, polyphenols, vitamins, minerals. They digest slowly. They feed your microbiome instead of hijacking it. They work with your biology. The carb debate in popular media almost never makes this distinction. It treats all carbohydrates as a monolith. It leads people to eliminate things like lentils and sweet potatoes. And with the new American Dietary Guidelines released in January 2026, it could become a bigger problem. The MAHA guidelines, Make America Healthy Again, get some things generally right. They warn us against ultra-processed food, about time. But they also cut the recommended grain servings nearly by half. They put red meat at the visual top of the new food pyramid, and were written by a panel of experts, 8 of whom had documented financial ties to either the meat or the dairy industry. The process was closed. No public input, no live streamed meetings. So here's my clinical problem with that. The average American already gets only 17 grams of fiber per day. The recommendation is 25 to 38. Only 5% of the population reaches it. And fiber does not come with protein shakes and steak. It comes from the grains and legumes and whole food carbohydrates that this new pyramid just pushed to the bottom. We've been here before. The lobby changes, but the mechanism does not. 30 years ago, it was the grain industry filling half the pyramid with bread and pasta. Today, it's the beef and dairy industry filling the top with steak and cheese. What your microbiome needs has not changed. The bacteria that protects your gut, regulate your immune system, and keep inflammation in check run on fiber. not on whoever is currently lobbying in Washington. So then the gluten question. Let me talk about gluten because this is where the confusion between gluten avoidance and carbohydrate restriction does real clinical damage. Gluten is a protein found in wheat, rye, and barley. For most people, it's a non-issue. For some people, it's a genuine problem, and whether you are in that group depends heavily on your genetics. The key variants are HLA-DQ2 and HLA-DQ8. These are immune recognition genes. Their protein products expressed on the surface of immune cells can bind gluten peptides and trigger an inflammatory response. A 2020 peer-reviewed analysis established that these genes from the HLA family are present in 30 to 40% of the general population. But here's the critical nuance. Carrying these genes does not automatically mean you have celiac disease. The same analysis found that only 3% of carriers actually develop celiac disease. But then there is also a catch. Because as of today, with current methods, celiac disease is really underdiagnosed. So most people have symptoms, but they don't know why. And if you have doubts, book an exploratory call. I'll be happy to answer your questions. In my clinical practice, people who feel better when they avoid gluten, bloating, fatigue, brain fog, digestive discomfort after wheat or any other gluten source, they often do carry HLA-DQ2 or HLA-DQ8. Their body is giving them accurate feedback, and they should listen to it, or at least try to make sense out of it. In the show notes, you will find a link to my 2-week hypoallergenic diet program for people who want to know if their diet is causing their symptoms. The gluten-free aisle at the grocery store is not the answer. Swapping gluten-containing ultra-processed food for gluten-free ultra-processed food is not a health strategy. Real food carbs, that's the answer. Now, let's talk about cancer, because this is where the ketogenic diet conversation gets the most attention, and also the most distorted. The scientific basis for reducing carbohydrates in cancer prevention is real and serious. Cancer cells are extraordinarily glucose dependent. They use a metabolic pathway called aerobic glycolysis, sometimes called the Warburg effect, that preferentially burns glucose at a much higher rate than normal cells. Reducing available glucose theoretically starves the tumor while leaving healthy cells, which can run on ketone bodies, relatively intact. This is the logic behind ketogenic diets in oncology. What does the research actually show? Moderate carbohydrate reduction, roughly 80 to 120 grams per day, produces significant improvements in insulin level, inflammatory marker, without requiring full ketosis. The same 2021 study, published in Nutri-Genious, compared standard diet, low-carb diet, and ketogenic diet in breast cancer patients during rehabilitation, and the low-carb group, not the keto group, shows the most impressive improvements in quality of life. By the way, you will always find my sources in the show notes, and if you want to go deeper, join my member space. You'll get the nuances that I cannot fit into a 15-minute episode, the juicy details that I cannot reveal on air, and exclusive resources for members. It's free. I call it my crispy uncut bonus. So the question is never, is keto better than no change at all? The question is, does full ketosis give you meaningfully better outcomes than a sustainable moderate reduction in carbohydrate? Well, the evidence does not consistently say yes. I want to be clear. I'm not dismissing ketogenic diets. In specific clinical contexts, brain cancer, refractory epilepsy, certain metabolic conditions, they are evidence-based tools, and I respect the research behind them. But for most people, as a long-term strategy, strict keto comes with two problems that we rarely acknowledge. The first is biological. Ketosis promotes something called autophagy, the body's cellular recycling system, where damaged proteins and organelles are broken down and reused. This sounds unambiguously good, but autophagy is what researchers describe as a double-edged sword in cancer biology. A 2020 review published in Frontiers in Oncology summarized it pretty well. In early tumorigenesis, autophagy acts as a tumor suppressor. It clears potentially oncogenic material and protects genomic stability. But once a tumor is established, cancer cells can hijack the same autophagy machinery to fuel their own survival. They protect themselves from metabolic stress and they resist treatment. Published research from the American Association for Cancer Research confirms that autophagy supports cancer cells' survival under conditions of nutrient deprivation. This does not make autophagy bad. It makes the relationship between autophagy and established tumors complicated. Too complicated to invoke ketosis as a universal benefit without knowing the individual's full clinical picture. And we can trigger the protective benefits of autophagy through much gentler methods. Aerobic exercise, good sleep, consuming polyphenol-rich foods. Research published in Frontiers in Nutrition in 2025 confirms that polyphenols from berries, vegetables, and tea allows your cells to activate their own protective recycling systems without extreme carbohydrate restriction. The second problem is practical. After 30 years of watching people follow dietary interventions, I know this. The stricter the diet, the shorter the adherence. Most people, even the most motivated, cannot sustain ketosis for more than a few months. And a dietary strategy you abandon after 3 months does nothing for your long-term health. Some people even develop disordered eating patterns. So let me bring the genetic lens to this. Your response to dietary carbohydrates is not the same as your neighbor's. Gene variants change everything. HLA-DQ2 and HLA-DQ8, as we discussed, determine your immune response to gluten. If you carry these variants and you are symptomatic, gluten avoidance is not optional, it's clinical. Then there's FUT2, a gene involved in vitamin B12 metabolism that governs the composition of your gut microbiome. It affects how effectively you ferment prebiotic fibers from whole grains and legumes. FUT2 non-secretors have a naturally less diverse microbiome and may need to be more deliberate about feeding it with high-fiber real food carbs. For these individuals, eliminating all grains and legumes impoverishes the microbiome in ways that have measurable downstream effects on immunity and inflammation. And there's a PPARG. It influences how your body partitions energy between fat and carbohydrate metabolism. Certain variants respond better to fat as a primary fuel, while others metabolize glucose more efficiently. Knowing your variants tells you whether a moderate carb or a lower carb is more likely to serve you better. The population level recommendation is that 80 to 120 grams of carbohydrates per day from real food sources is a good starting point. The right number for you is informed by your gene profile, your metabolic markers, and your clinical history. This is what Nutri-Genomics makes possible: precision instead of just guessing. So, what to actually do? 1. Replace bad carbs with real food carbs. Refined carbohydrates you remove are replaced with a real one. White rice becomes quinoa or wild rice. Packaged crackers become sweet potato or oat cakes. Breakfast cereal becomes overnight oats with berries and seeds. You do not eliminate carbohydrates, you just upgrade them. 2. If you're symptomatic after wheat, rye, or barley, maybe you want to consult your physician. If you carry these variants and experience bloating, fatigue, brain fog, or digestive symptoms after gluten, don't eliminate it right away, because that could bias the results of a proper diagnosis. So eventually, once you're diagnosed, Do not go low carb, go gluten free. These are not the same. 3. Have a minimum of 80 grams to 120 grams of carbohydrates per day from real food sources. This is not keto. This is not a low-carb extreme diet. This is the moderate reduction that the research consistently shows lowers insulin, reduces inflammation, and is actually sustainable. So, moral of the story. We do not need to go against the grain completely. We need to choose the right grains, understand what our specific biology is telling us, and stop confusing the catastrophization of carbohydrates with science. The research on ketogenic diets is interesting. The case for reducing refined carbohydrates is strong and well supported, but the case for eliminating all carbohydrates for everyone permanently, that case does not exist in the evidence. So, moderation is a compromise. It's the strategy that actually works long enough to matter. If you want to know which carbohydrate strategy is right for your specific genes, among other things, you might want to book an exploratory call. Links is in the show notes. Thank you everyone for watching. Let's keep the revolution going. Keep it real with real food. The scientific basis for reducing carbohydrates in cancer prevention. The scientific for reducing carbohydrates in